Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to UCLA Media. This is David Torres, your host, and you're on An Hour with Dave. Good afternoon, everyone. It's Monday, and you're back on UCLA Media with An Hour with Dave, and I'm back. I'm back. Today we're going to start off with a bang. We got a special guest who's a consultant with An Hour with Dave, and I want to clear, before I introduce the guest, that all comments made on this show is mine and my guest, not necessarily anything to do with UCLA Media. So when you hate me. Got it? Okay. Our guest today is Jacob ARRINGTON, and he's going to talk to us about the Constitution and what actually has changed in it. Jacob, welcome. How are you?
I'm great, David. Yourself?
Oh, God's good to me. I can't complain.
I know you're there.
Jacob, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little intro.
Well, my name obviously is Jacob ARRINGTON. I've lived all over the world, done a lot of interesting things, owned companies in China and been to Sri Lanka, India, different places on business. Currently live in the Seattle area and have a small family. So I love government in its purest form, let's say, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
Beautiful, beautiful. Jacob, you and I were having a couple of conversations, and that's why I was interested in bringing you onto the radio show to talk about what was going on. Your knowledge, especially into the constitutional conventions and what was going on. Let's talk about that a minute, okay?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
and I want to start out by saying people need to understand what we see as the Constitution today is not the Constitution that was presented. And I'm talking about bastardizing it and in regard to the things that shouldn't have changed. So the topic today basically is the House of Representation, or the House of Reps, and how that has changed to literally a 1% group.
Okay. Now, we start off with the beginning in 1787, correct?
Yes, and in 1787, what you had was the third clause of Article 1, Section 2. And it basically follows that every centennial, the Congress is required to pass a law that establishes the appropriation process for the next 10 years. We don't do that anymore. So that really has created the problems we see today, the injustice, because you have a centralization of power. Now, they've said for 100 years now, this is okay, we can do this. The fact is, George Washington vetoed this. The Ninth Amendment doesn't allow it. And in 1794, we had a ratio from citizen to House representative of 1 to 37,000.
Hold up. Before you go any further, you mentioned George Washington. That was back in 1790s, early part, when he was president, no?
Yes, and he's very important in this subject because he's the only president not to belong to a party. So he doesn't have any affiliation with Whigs, Democrats, Republicans, Federalists, none of them. And what he said in his first veto was that we cannot limit the size of the House of Representatives arbitrarily. It has to be reviewed every 10 years to go up or go down. And since then, a lot has changed.
But Jacob, that has nothing to do with the census, right?
The census is still maintained, but the House of Representatives doesn't change size anymore, and I'll go into that more and how that's unconstitutional.
Okay, but so back in the 1700s, I would imagine that the population would have been different.
Very different. We're looking at a much smaller population. We're looking at a few million, and today we're looking at 325 million, according to the 2010 census, I believe.
Well, let me ask you this: was the number of representatives back in them days the same number that we have today?
No, there were around 65 in 1794, and of those 65, they each represented 37,000 people.
Whoa. So what do they represent now?
Well, we have 435 that was set in stone in 1929, and they each represent about 780,000. Break it down.
Maybe that's part of the confusion in Washington.
Maybe it's a big part of the confusion, and it's a big part of the confusion for the people of this country. It's getting to be more likely to be struck by lightning than to meet a rep.
Okay. So let me understand this. So that number is locked in the stone since when?
1929.
Since 1929, but the population keeps growing.
Oh, in 1929, the representation was about 1 to 209,000 people.
Wow.
So it's incredible how much we've grown in that time frame. And I definitely want to go into some detail prior to this to let people understand where that all plays out. It's quite incredible, actually.
Okay. All right. But I'm trying to make sure that my people understand exactly what you're going with. So when the Constitution first came on board, it had a smaller number of people to represent as
Yeah.
far as the Senate.
As far as the Senate and the House. Now,
Okay.
the Senate hasn't changed in as much as the House. The House is the critical part in the discussion and the critical part for representation, because the House is to do the will of the people. That is truly their only function, the will of the people. So that was why they were created. They were supposed to be basically a listening platform for people in each community. And since then, they're anything but. In some cases, like Montana, you have one rep and you have two senators. So it's flip flop because of the population discrepancy and the amount of reps you have. So you don't
Okay.
have representation for the people. And what you have are people lashing out now. You have people screaming for representation and they don't have it. They can't have it. And that goes back to really a two-party system. And that's why I bring it back to George Washington. He's the only president that doesn't have stake in the game when it comes to party affiliation. And he's sitting here saying, look, guys, this is wrong. You cannot do this. So,
Okay. So in actuality, if they're up to, you said what, 17,000 per?
I'm sorry, 17,000.
Per representative.
Oh, per rep, right now they have 780,000 people if you break it out equally. Now, it doesn't work out exactly like that. It's
Right.
much higher in some cases. So,
Wow. So we're behind technically on enough people to represent the population.
yes, we are. Now, the argument in the past that's been presented has always said, well, there's nothing that says it can't be 1 to 10 million. And there isn't anything in the original Constitution that states that. But here is where the problem comes into play. When you start having a concentration of power at the top among a few people, you're going back to the kings and the lords of old, and you have a concentration of power. Now, what that does in effect is it strips tribes that have sovereignty in the U.S., and it strips states of their sovereignty. So you're breaking this all down. So essentially, what you have is this power struggle between federal and state, and you're supposed to have an equal breakdown of that and a review of it every 10 years.
Okay.
So the number doesn't matter as much as having the review, and we're not even allowed to have the review in the system we currently have.
Huh. Okay, so basically, we're at the will, at their will, without them actually meeting the responsibility to represent the people.
And it's even worse than that. We have a two-party system structure, and we have for 170 years. We've always been playing around with the two-party system because the country was small when that was set up. So when you stop and think about it, you don't have 435 reps making the decision. You have one side of 435 making the decision. So in
Huh.
reality, when a federal law comes into play, each rep essentially covers 1.4 million people because their party's in control. So 225 people literally control the House of Representatives for the will of the people in the United States.
Wow.
It's incredibly
Interesting.
small,
So,
incredibly small amount of people.
so, and there's no way possible each representative is going to know what the people really want.
It's it's virtually impossible.
Yeah,
We
it's
have
impossible.
the
It's
when
impossible. Yeah,
it
so
is,
so that's why you see party lines being drawn.
and you have the worst representation of a democracy or a republic in the world with the House of Representatives. It's worse than Mexico. It's worse than literally any democracy out there. Now, the ratio is terrible, but they keep using this clause and saying, hey, there's no reason the ratio can't be 1 to 20 million because it's not in the original Constitution. But my argument is the original Constitution says that we have to have a review of this every 10 years. And without an amendment to that clause, it's virtually illegal for what the representatives did in 1929. And what it's doing is cutting off the voice of every minority group in the country. Now, I want to explain too what I believe is minority. I don't believe in racial lines. It's crazy to me to think in that way, especially in this day and age. And I know we are all about that, but there's more to it than that. And when you look at minority lines, you have to look at these small towns as well. And yes, the people may be white, but those people are minorities in the big scheme of things. And you have to look at the inner cities and look at those folks and say these people have no representation because we have such a small group of people making the rules. And that's
Interesting.
where the
Go ahead.
division comes.
Okay, so if you're kind of flipping it a little bit, no,
When you say flipping it, what are you referring to?
you're flipping it because the way I always sometimes just talk to people, they think that the inner cities are the ones not being representative when the one it's a Caucasian group being more powerful, more representative.
Well,
So it's equal amount of not being representative across the board, right? That's not
yes,
about the color, it's about representation.
yes, and the two-party system literally grabs on that and in a way pulls us apart from each other because if somebody from the inner city met somebody from a small town in Missouri that has 300 people in it, they would start to realize, wow, we are in the same situation. We literally are in the same situation without this representation. But that is the last thing the parties want. They
Uh,
would hate that to happen because it
Beautiful. Well,
crushes.
listen, let's hold on to that thought because we're getting ready to go on a commercial break.
Good.
But we'll be back. Everybody, grab yourself a cup of coffee, a soda, some chips, or whatever, because you see this is an interesting topic, and we'll be back in a few. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to UCLA Media. This is David Torres, your host, and you're on An Hour with Dave. All right, everybody. It's great to be back. It's a beautiful day. God's blessing us. And we got an interesting conversation going on here with my guest, Jacob Arrington, and I need to say this again. The comments and the expressions expressed on this show is mine's and my guest only. It does not represent what Usula Media at any way in any way. Okay, it's me. It's me. It's a freestyle show, and the conversation stops with me. Okay, we're back. Jacob, you still here?
Yeah, I'm still here.
All right. So Jacob, tell us. Go on with your chain of thought that you were having.
Okay, well, where we left off is essentially going through the process of how the different parties conduct business and whatnot. And a lot of people would say, you know what, they're very different. And they are. They're two sides of the same coin, according to everyone. The thing is, there's a lot of in between that no one shows you. They don't show anybody. And I would love to start with the Civil War and the end of the Civil War. So if we can start there, Dave, that would be great.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I mean, I'm finding it interesting. I'm looking at my engineer and my. Hey, how do you find it? He finds it interesting too. So we're online. Go ahead.
Okay, well, one of the things I wanted to bring up were the black codes that were put into place in 1865. Now, you had Republicans and you had Democrats. Obviously, the Democrats lost the Civil War, but really did they? We have to look at this and say to ourselves, how does a party that loses a war gain power after a war? And you have to question that for a minute. Wait a minute. The Democrats are still in power. And the Republicans were okay with letting them back in. So, wow, that's quite interesting. Now, that was obviously some compromises, right? So you start to look past the Civil War and you say, well, what really took place? Okay, well, the first thing that seemed to take place were the black codes. What are the black codes? No one talks about these things. Now, obviously, if you have anyone that's a minority in your family, you're seeing it. You know what these are most of the time. I do. We have family all over the world, and these things are crazy. So essentially, you say, you know what? You're all free. Everybody, 4 million people that were slaves are now free. But you know what? We're going to put these codes on you. You're going to have to listen to us because we're going to do the right thing for you and integrate you. But in actuality, they didn't. I don't know what was unfortunate there. But both parties gained by this. Now, you look at where the Republicans were and you look at where the Democrats were, strictly divided north and south. This stayed true for many, many years afterwards. Now, I want to point out that black men got the opportunity to vote starting in 1870. Now, I want everyone to understand what I'm going to say because this is critical. In 1870, black men had more representation in the House than they do today. Now, David, I just want to make sure your listeners understand all minorities before 1929 had more representation than they do today.
But that's due to the growth in population.
It is, and the stagnation of the size of the House of Reps.
Right. Right.
So when you stop and think about this, a black man in the South had more opportunity to speak to a rep than he would today because they would have been in his community in some place. Now, I'm not saying they did, but I'm saying they had more opportunity too if those racial divisions weren't there. And that's critical because you soon start to see women's rights to vote, 1910, 40 years later. And then the last group, the Native Americans, got to vote in 1924.
Hold up. Stop. I gotta ask you a question here.
Sure.
You're telling me that the Native American with the Indians were the last group of people to vote, but were the first ones in this country.
Yeah, yeah, they walked here
Is
first.
that basically what you're telling me? I mean, I
Um,
understand that every group, women and black male and minorities, I understand that. But the Native American, who to me are still mistreated, but that, I guess that goes later. But So they were the last to get the right to vote,
Yes, they
even
were.
though everything was taken away. It's interesting. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, they were definitely the last. 1924 was when they finally got the right to vote. Now everybody kind of pushes them to the side a lot because they have sovereign nations, is said. But I would like people to view the sovereign nations and understand what they don't have on their land and what they are lacking in many, many situations. People see a casino, they assume they have a lot, but go deeper and understand where wounded is. Really are suffering.
Sorry. You got to speak closer to your mic.
Oh, my apologies. Can you guys hear me better?
Yeah.
So basically, I was saying some of these tribal areas are extremely impoverished and they need help, but they don't have any real representation at all. And that goes back to that minority vote and minority representation. See, it's interesting to think all these people gained the right to vote, but then in 1929, the opposite effect happened. Essentially, in 1929, what you have is a reverse to all these freedoms. And people don't realize that the 1929 Appropriation Act was actually based on racial division. You see, what was going on in the cities is they were exploding in minority population and immigrants. Well, rural America at the time was quite racist, and I'm letting everybody know in 1930, rural America was racist. They
Well,
reached out to their representatives saying, we don't want the voices of the cities to be stronger. Well, you have a two-party system that wants to abide by that because the fact is it helps them control the system better with limited amount of people to control.
okay.
So
So let me interject something here too. So we're talking about we went on a step beyond the Civil War. And we got into the when each party, when each group of people were got their rights to vote. Blacks in 1870, women in 1910, and then and I still get that gets to me. Native Americans in 1924, and then 1929 they froze and changed everything. So we've been misrepresented by two parties who have a monopoly.
exactly. And
Whoa, all right, I'm following this thing here. You
you can't.
following this thing here, Ramos? Okay. All right, go ahead.
So this system, we'll say, it's it derives itself in a variety of ways from history's past. When you start looking at ancient times and how a system between governments can control populations based on the right and the left. It's extremely simple, actually. Is you basically teach these people how different they are. It's essentially, think of it like two dogs, and there's a chain link fence between them, and these two dogs are taught to hate every day, hate that other dog, and they fight tooth and nail through that fence, but they can never quite get to each other. And then once in a while, the owner comes out and throws a bone to him and says, "Hey, calm down. We're going to fix everything for you. We're going to make it all right."
I'm laughing, but it's not. I get where you're going with your picture here.
Yeah, so essentially what you have for 170 plus years is this two-party system that literally has us fighting like two packs of dogs. We can't see the center point that we're literally all in this together and we're being torn apart because we really don't have representation or options at this point. We literally have to pick one side or the other side, even if we don't agree with it. So, for example, I didn't agree completely with Donald Trump. I didn't agree totally with Joe Biden. But at the end of the day, what choice do I have? They have a stranglehold on the system because of the 1929 Act that limited the will of the people. That's exactly what it did. And that's the critical point in our history, is that situation that no one seems to know about.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. This is an incredible amount of information that we're getting here. Um, and so okay, so as we stand right now, we need to figure out 1929 destroyed us.
Yes, and I need to explain that a little further
Go
because I
ahead.
know it's kind of get carried away here, folks, so I do apologize. But I need everyone to understand that the 1929 Act was based on racism, completely based on racism. And please, listeners, look this up yourself. It was the Appropriation Act of 1929. They Everyone needs to address this. Everyone in the country. But you have to understand that this violated the 1787 Convention, George Washington's veto, the Ninth Amendment, all tribal treaties, and states that joined the Union before 1929 have been violated and their sovereignty taken. We're not talking about something simple here. We're talking about an unbelievable, in my mind, scandal. It's horrible what this one act did, and it slowly degraded all of those rights, and they knew it would.
So are we locked into these agreements or these laws that are, or these changes that they made? Are we locked into them?
Even in the day it was founded, there were people arguing, saying this is wrong, and you
Okay.
can't do this. So we are locked into it to the point to where the people allow it. And that's the problem. We're not aggressive enough. Now, you have to remember in 1929, 1930, we were going through the Great Depression. So, literally, the government could have done anything they wanted because if everyone is standing in bread lines, no one's interested in the government at that time. They're
Whoa.
terrified they can't feed their
Okay.
family.
Huh.
So it
Whoa.
passed. Got this through, and they made it happen, and they did exactly what they wanted to do to instill that two-party system. But where do you go from there, right?
Right. Well, you know what? Yeah, that's interesting. So we're really being controlled by two parties, and they know it.
Yes, it's no different than when you have lords of regions and a king. Now, our king may change every 4 to 8 years, but you look at that system of old Europe, and you start to realize very quickly, wow, this is modeled very similarly. I apologize, because you have reps that have literally been in office 30 and 40 years, very similar to lords of old. It's
But that's one thing that I say. We that really needs to be changed. We don't have a change over there. We may change the king, as you say, the president here, but we don't change the the representation. It stays there forever and ever and ever. And I think that's turned out to be a humongous mistake.
and it and I don't know how much time we have left in this segment, but I would love to go into more of that and explain why these reps.
Well,
But
here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a break. So you keep that chain of thought, and we can go into the next segment of the show and hit on some of that you wanted to, and move on from there.
okay,
So everybody, tighten up. I know it's exciting. I know we're getting a lot of information to you at one time, but we'll be right back. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to UCLA Media. This is David Torres, your host, and you're on An Hour with Dave. Welcome back, everyone. I don't know if you're as excited as I am at this information that we're getting here. It kind of gives you a full picture or a picture of what we've been going through in this country and why this country is headed the way it is. And how we're being used as puppets. I always use the expression of chess pieces when you got Congress and the Senate on both sides, and let's get it right, both sides really are playing us. When you got Congress and Senate, and they're actually, if you know anything about chess, the king and the queen and all its knights and pieces, and then the pawns are us, and we get shoved around and sacrificed and eaten up and they just keep doing it to us and we keep accepting it. And now we're trying to come to the light here with my guest, Jacob Arrington, and he's kind of giving us information that a lot of us might not heard about, didn't get in school, don't understand, because right now our educational system for the last few years have been taking a nosedive. I don't even want to get into what's going to happen this year. But let's get back. Jacob, you still there?
Yes, I'm here, happily here.
All right, all right. Let's get back into this where you were heading with your piece. Go for it.
Sure. So we look at the House of Representatives and we look at how much power each one of these people yield, and it's incredible. Now, if you're a state level representative in the Democrat or Republican Party, you don't have a lot of power anymore. Now, in the old days, you would have had a tremendous amount of power to make things happen, and your constituents would have come to you and said, "What can you make happen?" Now, what you're seeing is this consolidation of power at the top. So there's really a division between a Democrat and a Republican at the federal level and a Democrat and a Republican at the state level. What's happening is because of this consolidation of power, the feds can make more and more laws that the states should have had the right to make individually of each other. So you're seeing this, and it just gets worse and worse. So at the end of the day, you can't go to a state level rep and say, well, I think we need to have a gun law this way, or I think we need to have transgender issues handled this way. That's all being taken from the state because their sovereignty is being taken because of that consolidation of power. So the will of the people in those states is not being conducted because of this consolidation.
So I understand what you're saying, and I'm trying to, in the back of my mind, it's killing me, because I don't want to get off the topic of what we are on. But man, that means that the Native American, who was the last ones to get votes, are the most being mistreated today, even though we have all the fighting going on.
Exactly. At least you hear about issues with other minority groups in this country. You hear about Hispanic people coming across the border. You hear about black communities that are just in destitute situations. And trust me, the Native Americans, in many cases, have it much worse, and people don't recognize them because their voice is so small. Now, if you have consolidation of power at the top, and you're having to represent these people, you're saying, well, they're just 1% of the population. And my voter base is 780,000 people. So what I need to do is I need to get 400,000 people to vote for me. And then I'm good. I don't need anybody else. 300, and there's only, 15,000 people in that tribal area. So who cares? Or, oh, downtown Baltimore doesn't have that many people anymore in this area, or Gary, Indiana doesn't have that many people. So at the end of the day, I need 700. I need 400,000 out of almost 800,000. So hey, let's do this and get the main population. So
Okay.
that
So
breaks.
as we're going moving forward, I got to ask you a curious question. How do the Native Americans mostly vote? Because obviously they're the ones in most despair right now. How do
Well,
they vote? Are they Democrats? Are they Republican? Independent? What? You have any idea?
I don't have any idea. I know tribes are very individual, and people seem to forget that a tribe on the East Coast and a tribe in the Midwest, a tribe on the plains, a tribe in the mountainous areas of the Pacific, they're going to be very different. They're they're almost as if different countries, and people
Okay.
tend to forget about them. So
All right. Beautiful. Beautiful. So what you're getting really is a picture for the people now to realize that we've been used.
Yes,
Okay.
completely.
Wow. Incredible. Incredible. All right. So, Jacob, go ahead. I don't want to keep interrupting you, um, but I want to actually ask you if at this point we're locked in there, and they locked us in, we still can get it turned around.
Yes, we can. We can by
No,
forcing our hand. We force the will of the people to
we
say
still can't get it
enough
turned
is enough.
around. Or
Yes, we can.
what?
And
What do you think?
yes, we can get it turned around. Can you hear me?
Yeah, oh, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. We can get it turned around, and it may take a while, but we have to have the will of the people come through, meaning people have to fight for what they believe is theirs. Now, the problem with that is historically, people are on the right, people are on the left. We need to unify and say, enough's enough. Now, that's extremely hard for people that have seen themselves as a Democrat or Republican all their life. They have a hard time adjusting to the fact that they have something in common with someone on the other side. But I take education, for example. Everybody wants better education. They want to get rid of the national debt. They want to have money in their pockets. Now, these things seem to be issues of the right or the left when either one get in power. They just forget what they said they were going to do. Um, so moving forward, the best thing in my eye
we
is to
need.
almost start another party or to break the two-party system apart. Now, the problem is getting people to understand how to go about doing it.
All right. Well, before you get too far on the people, we need to get them to understand, and I'm doing this slow on purpose. We need to get them to understand that the representatives in Washington are supposed to be, again, everybody, representatives, right?
Yes,
Meaning that they represent us, not the other way around.
exactly. And
Okay.
we
And
lost that
and
too.
since the 1929, really, it's been reversed.
Yes, and even before that, you start to see consolidation because at at that date you have 1 to 209,000 for the representation. So it's still they're trying to divide that every 10 years, but they can't do it fast enough. The quickest way is to change the laws to make sure there's no more representatives and lock themselves in power.
Well, that's really, again, it comes up to the people. The people need to realize that we've been used by two parties, and that, you know, we the people are not properly representative.
Correct.
And the bottom line.
It is the bottom line that the people are going to have to stand up and say, okay, do I want do I want to fight for extreme issues on the right or the left, or do I want the state to address those things that I live in?
Well,
And then to say, what?
that's the other thing, because the way I'm picturing what you're saying is that not only are we not represented properly, and both parties have known this for a long time, if I'm understanding correctly, but at the same time, the issues that should have been the states is not there. It's controlled by everybody but the state.
Exactly. The House of Representatives was never intended to pile on laws on top of the Bill of Rights. They were literally intended to do interstate transit international products, um, tariffs, things that had to do nationwide with items that were with taxes, things like this. They were never intended to address individual buildings and structures and roads. That was
Oh, come
really,
on, Jacob. How do you expect them to go in as an ordinary person and leave a millionaire?
well, that's a good point there, right? The House of Reps,
I mean, come
they keep.
on. You're taking away their money.
It is interesting how some of that plays out, and I don't want to get into that too much on today's show. But there is substantial interest in my mind of how someone becomes a multimillionaire when they're a rep and they make 225,000 a year, and they come out with book deals and different things.
Well,
That
I mean, I would love to interview both sides of the party when we're talking about millionaires and ask them how they got there. I doubt they're going to come on my radio show, but if any of them were daring to, I would love to have them come on my radio show. I'll give them the entire hour, but they're going to
yeah,
get dogged because I might bring the Leslie Acosta on, and then they're really in trouble. Go ahead.
sure. The situation really comes down to representation on all of this. And when I say representation, I mean representation for everyone. I want everyone out there to think about the groups they can't stand the most. Those people they can't stand have a voice because they're Americans. They have a voice because they are in this country. And the problem is, these people, meaning all of us, don't have a voice. I don't care if it's Black Lives Matter, Black Panthers, the Ku Klux Klan, Antifa. People don't have a voice. And at the end of the day, well, there's always going to be someone that hates someone else. But
Well, I think that racism, it goes across the table. You don't have to be white to be racist.
oh
I've
no,
always
not
said that.
even. I know
You don't
many
have to be
people
white
all
to
over
be
the world
racist.
that are racist that aren't white.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I kind of always cup racism and ignorance together.
Yeah,
Like,
and that goes back to
I've
your
known
education.
people that say this particular colored person, and then you say to them, okay, you don't like what, white people? And then you find out that, lo and behold, they really never bothered white people till they went to get a job,
Yeah,
and
I
vice
I
versa,
lived,
So
and
I
I
think a
lived
lot of
over
that starts at home, that hatred, and
yeah, I lived overseas for
I
many
don't
years.
allow it in my house. So
Yeah, same here. It's almost comical to me that somebody would think of that parameter because I lived overseas many years, so I know I'm technically look white completely here, but the fact is, I was a minority for many years, and you see it from a different lens, right? And a lot of people see it from one lens because they're in the United States. They have to remove themselves from that and say, "What? I'm really I'm no different than anybody else because of a pigmentation or melatonin." That's ridiculous. And that's where we need to draw that line and say we're not different. We want the same things. We want a nice home. We want to we
I
want to
mean, I
live
mean,
like
you know what? If you want to talk about the issue of racism and how it's divided here in the country, that's one thing. The way they've done it, but technically, if you have anybody to take a DNA test, an ancestry test, they're gonna find out that they're not so pure as they think.
I'll
Okay,
tell you,
so
it's
you better be careful when you call somebody white and make it insulting, or black and make it insulting, or Hispanic and make it insulting, because it turns out that you most likely are related somewhere along the line to that person. So wake up, America. Don't be used as pawns again in a chess game.
exactly.
Anyway, we're going to get ready to go on the last break. And then, Jacob, when we come back, we want to finalize this conversation. But through this whole thing, I've been making some notes on what it's going to actually take to rock the world with a solution about everything that's going on. And let's see. Okay? Ready to go on a break? Our last break. Everybody get ready. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to UCLA Media. This is David Torres, your host, and you're on An Hour with Dave. Welcome back, everyone. I love you guys out there. This has been a hot topic. There's a lot of information. I know you're trying to suck it up, but I gotta tell you that there's more. I think we gotta talk a little more to Jacob. I made some points and ideas of what it's gonna take to shake the street and bring things back to a norm because I got a funny feeling we're heading way off base on how to get this country back together again. And so, Jacob,
Yes,
are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, Jacob. Is there any piece that you want to talk about before I get into what I think are the solutions and see what you think?
I would like to bring up a couple points that I missed in my notes here. I apologize to the listeners. Um, One of the key things I think for the House of Representatives is it needs to be about 1 to 100,000 people. Now, that's not set in stone, and the U.S. Supreme Court would say, look, there's no number. But my argument is that we need to at least have the review every 10 years. What they did in 1929 by not letting us have the review and change the law per the original Constitution literally took that right away from the people. They gave it to the two-party system, which unfortunately the U.S. Supreme Court is a two-party system in itself. So I don't know if it could ever change, but it would be hard-pressed to argue with George Washington and the Ninth Amendment.
Yeah, but
Now,
but okay. So let me put it to you this way: 1 to 100,000 people. You know how many representatives you're talking about?
about 3,250.
Well,
And
you
that
did
would
that faster than me. I have a friend, Antonio, that if he heard you say that, he said, "Oh, somebody actually beat David." Okay, so you need how many?
so you need about 3,250, and people would say in that Democrats and Republicans, oh, that's too many, it's wrong, you can't govern that. And you're right. As a two-party system, you can't govern that, which is the way it should be. It should not be a two-party system. So now you have all these reps. Now you're thinking, oh, we don't have enough seats in Washington, D.C. You know what? I have a solution. We have localized centers, 8 of them in the lower 48, one in Alaska, one in Hawaii. Reps can drive to their local place, cast their vote, and leave. Now they have an office localized within 100,000 people. It could be a town of 25,000. And all of a sudden, that town has a rep because they were voted in that 100,000 people area.
Well, okay, I can live with that, but then I could see that as also controlling because then they will actually have to get out there and talk to the people and see what their representative, what them as a representative is supposed to vote yay or nay on, and they won't have time to figure out how to make a million.
Also, it doesn't allow them to congregate together in a two-party system. Literally, you're going to have many voices coming to the table. Now, with that, you can't have bills that are 5,000 pages long because now you have 32, and you have to have at least 1,600 people vote together on an idea. So the fact is, that's what the House was supposed to be, the voice of the people. So if 1,600 people in the House can agree on a subject, great, it passes because that's the will of the people. So that means you're literally representing 200,000 people each with that vote because that won. So one side lost, one side didn't. But everybody gets to see that person at breakfast on Saturday morning and ask him, why did you vote the way you did? I thought you told me you were going to vote this way. The whole narrative, it's not a giant corporation in Washington, D.C. or an international country saying, hey, we would like you to do this. Because now that one rep doesn't govern enough people or have enough power to make that happen. They literally are there for the will of the people in their district. They're not worried about an international company because the international companies don't have enough power to go to 1,600 reps and try to turn them because there's too many personalities, too many things that each person wants or needs for their community and says, this doesn't have anything to do with me.
And too many pockets to line. to
Exactly, and
get that
it's
vote.
impossible to make that
Yeah,
happen.
yeah, I see that. I see that because there's a real problem. If anybody's been following what's going on in Washington, there's a lot of money. When you think about how much they spent in Florida, how much they spent in Georgia, how much they spent, yeah, does anybody imagine why in the world are we spending $100 million or whatever it is on a race in Georgia if it wasn't simply to control how they're going to get the narrative out there and keep the money flowing in their direction?
Exactly.
Why even we allowing big money to dictate to us who the hell represents us?
And
Why?
and exactly. And the fact is, with 3,250 reps, which like I said, they're going to scream and say it's too much. But with that many reps, no one can control the will of the people, and that's what it was set to do in 1787. It was supposed to dictate to everyone, this is what the people want. It's not what the big companies want. It's not what the party wants. It's literally what the people want. Now, with that being said, I personally think we need to have a multi-party system. Now, Britain has it. They only have 60 million people. Lots of places have multi-party systems. It's kind of odd to me that for 170 years, we've been stuck with two parties that have controlled nearly everything, every
Well,
aspect of our lives.
well, okay, but here's let's get into this a minute, okay? Because here's what I'm looking at right now. Right now we got a two-party system. Right now we got two parties who controls what happens from the very beginning of every race, whether it's presidential or whether it's not. They control it simply by saying if you're not a Republic from the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, you cannot start getting your votes together till we lock in all of our signatures and all of our votes.
Exactly.
And you, as an independent, cannot get your 2 cents in any way, shape, or form. And not only that, Jacob, but if I, for example, when I ran, needed 1,200 or 1,400, depending on the size and the votes for that particular congressional seat, um, and an independent comes along or a third party comes along, small one, and decides they're going to try to run something, these people have to get 3, 4, 5 times the amount of votes or signatures
Exactly.
to be able to just get on the ballot for November. And they're already playing catch up. It's set up really
Exactly.
slick
It's
because it
disgusting.
makes it where you don't know what's going on with that party, and you may not even get information because you're blocked out.
They they
A
are
perfect
basically
perfect
saying to you,
example was the young lady, governor, I believe it was from Hawaii, Tatilia. Is that am I doing this right?
I'm not sure.
Tatilia. Okay. Anyway, I'll get the name back. I'll get the name right later. But she ran, and she was a veteran, very smart woman, but never got on the stage for the presidency. She ran for presidency. If you listen to her, an incredible woman, very smart, very knowledgeable, but because they did what they did, she didn't, because they said if you didn't have enough money and enough signatures and enough this, you couldn't get on the stage with the Democrat and the Republican. It's a joke.
It is a
I
joke.
believe, Jacob, I believe that it is time. And everybody out there, remember, I say it all the time. It's my opinion, not Usula media. But it's time that we give the Republican Party and the Democratic Party a wake up call and start looking at a very new party, a party that actually represents the people. I
Agreed.
believe it's coming. I believe the day is coming. And I know that I think in my gut that before you know it, the way the system is taking us and the road it's taking us down on this time for the next election for the President of the United States, we, the people, will have a choice for another national party. What do you think? And I think it's time.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and the fact is, what people need to understand, when you said you have to have this many votes to be elected into the Democrats or the Republicans, and this many to be in another party, they're basically telling you your voice counts less because you're not part of these two parties.
Yeah.
If you're part of these parties, you have a larger voice. You're more important to us than the others. And that's really what they're saying to us with all these rules and bylaws and all of the things they've done for 170 years. They've literally kept themselves in those two pockets.
Yep. I agree. I think we've gone a long way. Regrettably, our show is down to 2 minutes. I would have had a lot more to say to Jacob. I want to thank you for coming on and giving this information, and you made me very proud to have you as a consultant for
David,
an hour with Dave. But I want to say to the people, I love you guys. You know I do. I don't care what color your skin is. I don't care if you're short. I don't care if you're tall. I don't care if you're fat. I don't care if you're skinny. I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent. Stop getting suckered. That's all I got to tell you. Stop getting suckered. And I'm telling you, keep listening to me. Keep listening to my radio, because I guarantee you, by the next presidential election, and maybe sooner, you're going to have a full-term third party to vote for and choose from. And it's going to be a wake-up call to the Republican and the Democratic Party that we, the people, are sick and tired of their nonsense. Let's see. Jacob, thank you very much. I appreciate you, my brother. And we definitely will be talking again, right?
Yes, yes, we will.
Okay. Thank you. God bless. God bless America. God bless our leadership. Boy, do we need it. And I see you next Monday. If anybody has anything they want to know, again, you can criticize me. You can do whatever you want. But David Torres is going to check out, and I'll see you guys next Monday. I'll try to get information to you about the next show, and we will be following this up. God bless you. Love you. Take care. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to UCLA Media. This is David Torres, your host, and you're on An Hour with Dave.